never thought my life would twist into something like this, so raw, so humiliating, and yet, so filled with the fire of vengeance. My name is Ellen Roberts. I am 58 years old, and I live in Virginia, America. For most of my life, I was a quiet woman. I raised my only son, Daniel, after my husband passed away when Daniel was 12. Every breath of my existence, from then until now, has revolved around his happiness. Friends, you enjoy listening to stories, but you don't subscribe to the channel or like the videos. I request you to please subscribe to the channel right now so that I get more motivation to bring you even more stories. If you help me reach 1,000 subscribers, I promise to bring you extremely best stories with a truly real feel, so go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and now let's move on to today's story. Years later, Daniel got married to a woman named Melissa. At first, she seemed polite, though distant. I thought, it's natural. It takes time for a daughter-in-law to open up. But little did I know, she would become the root of my deepest humiliation and the reason I woke up one day with burning determination in my heart to seek revenge. The breaking point came the evening she looked me in the eye and spat out words I'll never forget. "You embarrass me, I'm disgusted by you." My own daughter-in-law, in my own son's house. And the worst part? My son Daniel looked at me with those cold, decisive eyes and told me to leave. I remember that night like a scar etched into my skin. We were sitting at the dinner table. Melissa had made some modern dish I didn't quite understand, sweet potato gnocchi with truffle. When I foolishly added a little salt from the shaker, she slammed her fork down. "You just ruined it," she said sharply. "You don't respect me. You act like some cheap relative barging into my marriage. You embarrass me, Ellen. Honestly, I'm disgusted by you." The room went silent. I stared at her, my lips trembling. Surely, Daniel would defend me. But he didn't. "Mom," he said, his voice flat, "I think it's better if you leave." I thought I misheard him. But no. He was serious. My son, the boy I had stayed awake countless nights for, patching the holes in his shoes when I could barely afford my own, was siding with her. That night, with only my coat wrapped around my shoulders, I walked out. The streetlights blurred through my tears. I felt abandoned. Betrayed. Broken. But broken things, given time, turn sharp. For weeks, I lived alone in my small rented apartment. The walls were gray and peeling. My meals were quiet. My phone never rang, not from Daniel, not from Melissa. The pain rotted inside me until it transformed into something else. A seed. That seed was called revenge. You see, I am not just a mother. I am a woman who had to survive. I worked double shifts as a nurse when Daniel was a boy. I balanced bills down to the last penny. Life hardened me. And life gave me patience. One thing about revenge? It is best served after strategy, not rage. So I began to plan. Melissa prided herself on being glamorous. She came from a wealthy family in New York, with an image to maintain, perfect wife, perfect career as a fashion consultant, perfect marriage. But everybody has skeletons tucked away somewhere. It took time, but I found them. Through quiet observation, asking the right questions, and overhearing fragments of conversations whenever I was still part of their lives, I pieced together her cracks. Soon enough, patterns showed up, especially her frequent business trips to Boston. I hired a private investigator. Yes, Ellen, the woman they called embarrassing, disgusting, I took my savings and gave it to someone who knew how to find the truth. And the truth was exactly what I needed. Melissa was having an affair. With her own client. A wealthy designer, already married. When I received the photographs, I felt waves of something powerful: vindication, fury, triumph. Still, I didn't act right away. Oh, no. Revenge requires patience. The perfect opportunity came 6 months later. Daniel invited me, almost reluctantly, to a Thanksgiving dinner at their home. I knew Melissa wanted me there only for show, to parade her civility in front of her friends. That night, as the house filled with chatter and warm lights, I wore a simple black dress, modest and unassuming. I carried with me an envelope. Inside were the photographs. When dessert was served, Melissa began one of her speeches about elegance and refined taste. Her friends nodded, sipping wine. Daniel sat beside her, oblivious, proud. I stood up. My voice calm, my heart hammering. "I'd like to thank you for inviting me tonight," I began. "It feels good to be part of family traditions, even if family doesn't always feel so welcoming." A few polite chuckles. Melissa's smile tightened. "Actually," I continued, as I placed the envelope in front of Daniel, "perhaps we should talk about loyalty. About embarrassment. About disgust." His brow furrowed. When he opened the envelope and pulled out the photographs, silence fell. The entire table stiffened. Melissa turned pale. "This," I said, lifting my chin, "is the woman who called me disgusting. Take a good look." Gasps followed. Melissa tried to speak, but the weight of evidence was undeniable. Daniel's hand shook. His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. And in that moment, I got my first taste of revenge. Sweet, piercing, unforgettable. But I wasn't done. After the Thanksgiving chaos, Melissa tried to salvage her image. She insisted it was all misunderstandings, that the photos were manipulated. But doubt had already crept into Daniel's heart. Their marriage began fracturing from within. I didn't stop there. Using my quiet persistence, I whispered the truth to the right ears in her social circle. Her wealthy friends, her business contacts, one by one, I let the whispers land. Pretty soon, her reputation crumbled. The glamorous fashion consultant became the subject of gossip and ridicule. She had called me an embarrassment. Now she was the embarrassment, her name whispered at charity galas, her smile forced while her clients slipped away. And Daniel? He suffered too. I confess, that part ached in me. He was still my boy. But betrayal cannot be erased. He had cast me out when I needed him most. As his marriage disintegrated, his career faltered too. He grew bitter, angry, calling me one day to accuse me of ruining everything. But I reminded him. "You told me to leave, Daniel. You chose her over me. Now you both face the consequences." I hung up the phone that night with tears in my eyes. This was the cost of revenge. Melissa eventually left Daniel. The divorce was messy, public, humiliating for her. She tried to slander me, to accuse me of manipulations, but no one believed her anymore. She had lost credibility. Daniel, broken and lonely, finally came to my doorstep. He looked different, tired, thinner, hollow. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry." I let him in. I gave him food, warmth. Because I am still his mother. But forgiveness? That is something different. Now, as I sit here writing my story, I want whoever reads this to know, never underestimate a mother cast aside. They humiliated me. They threw me out like I was nothing. But I am Ellen Roberts. I rose. I struck back. Revenge is not always loud, not always violent. Sometimes, it is as simple as uncovering truth and letting it bleed into the lives of those who wronged you. Do I regret it? Perhaps. Do I feel vindicated? Absolutely. Because the next time anyone dares to call me embarrassing, I will smile. While they crumble. After Melissa left Daniel, I thought my work was done. But revenge has a curious way of refusing to settle quietly. Once you taste it, it lingers on your tongue, tempting you to take just a little more. Daniel tried to move on, but Melissa was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. She returned, not to win back my son, but to destroy him. Divorce had taken her wealth, her reputation was in ashes, and the only way she could rise again was by dragging Daniel deeper into the dirt. And I was not about to let her succeed. It began with small things. Daniel would get letters from debt collectors, even though his accounts were in order. He'd find his credit cards suddenly frozen, his name entangled in false charges. Someone was pulling strings. One evening, he stormed into my apartment, pacing like a trapped animal. "She's doing this, Mom. Melissa's out to ruin me. I know it." I believed him. Melissa had the venom for it. But my son, despite his arrogance, was not clever. He didn't know how to fight in shadows. I did. I had learned it through years of scrubbing hospital floors, working double shifts, and listening to people's secrets when they thought no one was watching. If Melissa wanted a war, she had no idea she was stepping into my battleground. I began following her, not physically, but in the world she thought was hidden. Social media, professional boards, online shopping accounts. Melissa had left digital fingerprints everywhere. And I found something. A secret bank account under a different name, with transfers that didn't line up with legitimate earnings. Melissa wasn't just living off settlements. She was laundering money for one of her friends, a fashion agent who doubled as an art smuggler. Now I had her by the throat. But I didn't go straight to the police. No. That would have been quick, shallow. She deserved more. So I waited. I gathered evidence, month after month, quietly stacking her sins into my collection. Each file, each slip of paper, was a weapon. During all this, Daniel spiraled. He drank late into the night. He blamed me sometimes, accused me of being the reason Melissa turned cold. Then he'd collapse into my arms, begging forgiveness. And there I was, torn. A mother always wants to protect her son. But mine had betrayed me so deeply once. Could I save him without losing myself? The answer came unexpectedly, one late night, when he muttered in his drunken haze. "Sometimes I wish she'd just disappear, Mom. Then I'd be free." The words struck me differently than he meant them. They weren't just despair. They were permission. Melissa's grand re-entry into society was a charity gala in D.C., a desperate attempt to restore her reputation. I knew she would flaunt, pretending all was well. That was the night I chose to strike. In my purse, I carried a USB drive, documents, recordings, bank trails. Every corrupt thread tied neatly back to her. I didn't go to the authorities. Not yet. Instead, I slipped it into the hands of a journalist who was covering the event. A young man hungry for stories of scandal and greed. The fallout was immediate. By midnight, Melissa's name started circling headlines online, socialite tied to smuggling scandal. Her face, painted with false smiles that evening, became the symbol of hypocrisy by morning. Daniel called me, confusion and fear in his voice. "Did you? Mom, did you do this?" I only answered with the truth. "She destroyed herself, Daniel. I simply let the world see. But revenge has a price. Mine came in the silence between me and my son. Though Melissa was cornered, though her power dwindled, Daniel looked at me differently now. There was a sharpness in his eyes, a hint of fear. He realized I wasn't the fragile, submissive mother anymore. I was someone who could set entire lives ablaze. And a son who once told me to leave now wondered if he himself was safe under my gaze. That was when I understood, my revenge wasn't just against Melissa. Whether I admitted it or not, part of it was against Daniel too. The boy who betrayed me. The man who chose another woman's side over his mother's heart. I loved him. God knows I did. But part of me wanted him to feel the weight of all I had carried. Melissa has been publicly ruined, but she is not finished. Her desperation breeds danger, and Daniel is now caught between fear of me and fear of her. And me? I no longer recognize the boundaries of how far I will go. Melissa was cornered, yes, but a cornered enemy is the most dangerous kind. After the smuggling scandal broke, her so-called friends abandoned her. The fashion houses cut ties, the magazines pulled her interviews, and even her wealthy family in New York disowned her publicly. But Melissa was not one to crumble quietly. Instead, she grew vicious. It began with threats. Anonymous letters slipped under my door. I knew it was her handwriting disguised, but not enough. Then came the phone calls at odd hours. Breathing. Silence. Sometimes laughter. One night, as I walked back from the grocery store, I felt it, the weight of footsteps behind me. A shadow that disappeared each time I turned. Melissa wasn't satisfied with ruining my nights. She wanted me afraid. But fear doesn't live in me anymore. Not after everything I'd already survived. Instead, her desperation gave me clarity. This was no longer about humiliation, about reputation. This was war. Daniel tried patching his life together. He begged his company not to fire him amidst the scandal splashing his wife's name. He drank less, worked longer hours, and hid in silence. One evening, he came over carrying takeout food, fried chicken, the kind he used to love as a boy. He placed it on my table awkwardly and said, "Mom, I know you're strong, stronger than I ever realized. But don't go any further. Please. I'm scared of what this might turn into." I looked at him across the table. My son. My betrayer. My blood. "You were scared of me the day you chose her words over mine," I said softly. "But you'll understand one day that I never fight without reason." He dropped his gaze. He couldn't deny it. If Melissa had kept her rage pointed at me, perhaps things would have ended differently. But she didn't. A week later, Daniel's car was found vandalized outside his office. Windows smashed, tires slashed, her initials scratched into the metal with a knife, M. That was her mistake. She showed her hand. Now, she had drawn my son into her madness. And that touched the one thread of loyalty inside me I could never let go of. So I decided, Melissa would not just be ruined. She would be erased. Through my investigator friend, I tracked every move she made. Melissa had burned her resources so badly that she was living in a cheap apartment outside DC, still meeting with shady friends in dark cafes, still trying to cling to fragments of her old power. I followed, quietly, invisible as the wind. I noted her schedule, her habits, when she left, when she came home. And then I set the trap. It was almost poetic. I fed a whisper, an anonymous tip, to one of the smuggler's rivals that Melissa had leaked information to the authorities. At the same time, I prepared a neat little folder of evidence showing her dealings, ready to send the FBI's way if she survived long enough to lash back. She had destroyed her own safety net. All I had to do was tug the last string. It happened on a chilly Friday night. Melissa arrived at a nightclub to meet a friend. But instead, a trap was waiting. I wasn't there physically, but I didn't have to be. I had orchestrated it all. The people she once depended on turned against her. By sundown the next day, headlines screamed again, but this time far darker than fashion scandals. Former consultant arrested in smuggling ring takedown. Melissa was officially finished. She wouldn't see sunlight without iron bars between her and the world for a very long time. And me? I stood at my window that night, watching the quiet streets of Virginia, breathing deeply. Revenge tasted final. But Daniel didn't see victory. He saw fear. He came to me after the news broke, eyes wide, hands trembling. You did this, didn't you? God, Mom. You did this to her. I looked him squarely in the eye. I didn't raise you to be fooled by snakes, Daniel. She dragged us both through hell. One of us had to burn her out. He shook his head, horrified. You're becoming something else. Someone I don't know. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was someone else. But I didn't care. Melissa is behind bars, but Daniel is slipping away from me, afraid, conflicted, guilty. I won the war, but perhaps I've also lost the bond one once lived my whole life for. Melissa was behind bars, her name rotting in every newspaper, her face plastered with shame across the internet. My war had been won. Yet, in the stillness of my apartment, I felt no peace. Just silence. Because my son no longer looked at me with love. He looked at me with fear. Daniel came over less and less after Melissa's downfall. When he did, there was a stiffness in him, as if every word had to pass over sharp rocks before it left his throat. Once, as we sat in the living room, he whispered almost to himself. You didn't just destroy her, Mom. You destroyed me too. The words lingered in the air like smoke. At that moment, I saw it, his resentment, his quiet accusation that I had pulled him into a vortex he could never climb out of. The boy I had raised, the man I had protected, no longer believed in me. And that hurt more than every insult Melissa ever threw my way. You'd think victory would calm me. That with my enemy caged and broken, I could finally rest. But revenge does not rest. It grows. I found myself scanning through Daniel's social media pages late at night, checking the women he followed, the coworkers he smiled with in photographs. A paranoia settled into my bones. What if another Melissa appeared? What if he betrayed me again, let another snake whisper poison into his ear? The thought gnawed at me until it became obsession. I told myself it was protection. But deep inside, I knew it was control. Then one evening, Daniel came to see me. He sat across my kitchen table, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. Mom, he said quietly, I'm leaving Virginia. There's been too much here, too much destruction. I can't keep living under the shadow of your war with her. I need distance. His words pierced deeper than Melissa's insults ever had. Leaving? My son? My whole reason for living these decades? You're punishing me, Daniel, I said, my voice raw. No, he answered, shaking his head. You punished yourself. And you punished everyone around you. I'll always love you, but I need air to breathe, Mom. Away from all this fire. He left that night without hugging me. Now my apartment feels colder than ever. The refrigerator hums too loudly. The shadows stretch too long. I walk by the window sometimes and catch a glimpse of myself reflected in the glass. My face is harder now, my eyes tired but sharp. I won. I destroyed the woman who tried to destroy me. But in doing so, I burned the bridge to my own son. And I wonder, did Melissa truly lose? Or was I the one standing in ashes, with no one left beside me? Ellen has achieved complete revenge, but she is consumed by the very darkness that gave it to her. Daniel is drifting away, and she now battles the emptiness revenge has left behind. Victory was mine. Melissa was gone, her empire destroyed, her pride shackled by prison walls. Yet, as I sat alone in my dim apartment, surrounded by silence, I realized something chilling. I felt no triumph anymore. Only hollowness. Revenge had been my crown, and now that it glistened on my head, it weighed like iron. It had been weeks since Daniel last visited me. His voice rarely came through the phone, and when it did, it was brief, cautious. "Mom, I'm busy. I'll call you later. I've got work early tomorrow. I'll stop by, maybe next week." Maybe. That was the word I kept hearing. I, who once held his hand through storms and sickness, was now a shadow in his life. And sometimes, late at night, a terrifying thought whispered, had Melissa won after all? She broke us apart, even from prison. My loneliness began reshaping itself into something darker. I told myself it was love for my son, but in truth, it was obsession. I started tracking him, quietly. I knew the bars he went to after work, the woman with short blonde hair who had begun smiling too often at him, the way his hand lingered near hers when they walked. Her name was Emily. I learned that from a quick slip of conversation when she laughed in the cafe where Daniel bought his morning coffee. Emily. Innocent. Pleasant. Soft-spoken. But I didn't trust innocence anymore. Innocence was just the mask Melissa once wore. One evening, Daniel called and mentioned her. "There's this girl," he said hesitantly. "She's nice. She listens to me. She makes me laugh, Mom." His voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard in years. But instead of joy, I felt a surge of fury. A new woman meant a new threat. "You barely finished putting your life back together," I told him sharply. "And now you're ready to let another woman crawl into your head and decide who you are." He went quiet. Then whispered, "You'll never forgive me for Melissa, will you? Not even if I try to live better." He hung up. I sat there, clutching the phone, breathing hard in the dark. My son was slipping again, this time not pulled by Melissa, but by me. A week later, I decided to see Emily for myself. She was leaving the cafe one rainy morning, hair damp, smiling at her phone, when I followed from a safe distance. She walked with the light steps of someone unburdened by shadows. And in that instant, I hated her. Not because she had wronged me, but because she could give my son something I no longer could, light. My grip on my umbrella tightened so hard it snapped. The sound startled her, and she turned, meeting my eyes briefly before hurrying off. I stood there, rain pouring over me, my heart hammering with something I no longer recognized. Was this still protection? Or had my revenge burned me so completely that I now sought enemies in innocence itself? That night, Daniel showed up at my door. His face was pale, his eyes tired, yet his jaw was set. "Emily said she saw you, Mom. Following her." His voice shook with restrained anger. "I was protecting you," I said firmly. "You don't understand, Daniel. Women like that, they'll ruin you, just like Melissa did." "No," he snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "No, Mom. Melissa didn't ruin me. You did. You and your war with her. You turned love into a battlefield, into something ugly. And I can't let you do that with Emily. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held my ground. I did everything for you, I whispered. And in the process, he said shakily, you've lost me. Then he walked out. This time, I knew he wasn't coming back. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Perhaps not ever. I sat alone again in the apartment that had become my castle of vengeance. The window reflected my face, the hard lines, the hollow eyes, the shadow of a woman who once was only a mother. I had won every battle. But the war had eaten the very thing I fought for. Melissa was destroyed. But so was my bond with Daniel. And as the night pressed against the glass, I finally whispered the truth aloud to no one but myself. Revenge has no winners. Only survivors. Ellen has now fully spiraled into obsession, losing grasp of her son in the process. She sits in the ruins of her own making, her victory leaving her utterly alone. When Daniel left that night, his voice cracking with hurt, something inside me broke in a way revenge never could have fixed. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking of Melissa, or enemies, or battles. I was thinking of my son, as a boy sitting at the dinner table, as a teenager rushing out the door with half-buttoned shirts, as a man carrying my groceries because he thought I was too tired. I realized he wasn't afraid of Melissa anymore. He was afraid of me. Days passed. Then weeks. Not a call. Not a message. The silence that once felt like strength now felt like a blade twisting inside me. I wandered the apartment like a ghost. I traced my fingers over the photographs of Daniel as a child, his graduation picture, the framed shot of us at Virginia Beach. Each one felt like a tombstone to a life that was gone. Melissa was nothing but a shadow now, but somehow, she still had one, because my son was gone. Not stolen. Not tricked. Pushed away. By me. It was a Sunday afternoon when fate gave me one last chance. I was walking near the farmer's market downtown when I saw them, Daniel and Emily. They weren't kissing, weren't holding hands. They were just talking. Laughing. And Daniel's face, oh, how I hadn't seen him smile like that in years. I froze, torn between jealousy and the sharp ache of longing. Emily noticed me first. Her smile faltered, but she didn't pull Daniel away. Instead, she touched his arm gently, whispering something to him. Daniel turned. His eyes met mine. For a long, heavy moment, no words passed. Just silence, heavy with anger and grief. Finally, I said the words I never thought I would. I'm sorry. They were small words, fragile, almost lost in the noise of the market. But they carried the weight of everything. Daniel didn't speak right away. He stared at me, his jaw tense, his breath uneven. Then he said softly, almost reluctantly, Mom, if you're really sorry, you have to prove it. Not with schemes, not with enemies destroyed. Prove it by letting me live my life. By letting her live hers. Without you turning it into a war. I wanted to argue. To protect. To shout, but love is worth fighting for. And then, like lightning, it struck me. No. Love was never meant to be a battlefield. Love was trust. And I had none left to give because I had burned it all in the fire of revenge. The next week, I began something new. Therapy. A word I had once scoffed at when others suggested it. But I entered that small room, sat across from a stranger with calm eyes, and admitted. I don't know how to live without the hunger for revenge. It's all I've known since I was betrayed. And I've lost my son to it. Admitting it didn't heal me overnight. But it cracked the walls I had built around myself. I called Daniel, not to accuse, not to warn, not to interfere. Just to say one thing. I love you. And that's enough. He didn't answer immediately, but later that night, my phone buzzed. A message. I love you too, Mom. But please, heal. For both of us. I'm still here, in my small apartment, watching the seasons pass through the window. I no longer follow Daniel. I no longer seek enemies where none exist. Instead, I sit with my scars, learning that survival is not the same as living. I tell my story here, not as a warning, not as a triumph, but as a confession. I was a mother who became a warrior. I was a warrior who became a destroyer. And now, I am a destroyer who is trying, desperately, to become human again. Revenge gave me nothing but ashes. But maybe, just maybe, if I let it go, there is still time for love to grow back from the cinders. Ellen has now stepped onto the path of redemption. She has recognized the cost of revenge and begun taking small, painful steps toward rebuilding her bond with Daniel, not through control, but through healing and humility. They say life always circles back to where it began, love and loss intertwine like threads on the same cloth. For me, my journey began with love for my son, twisted into vengeance, burned by betrayal, and scarred by obsession. But here, at the edge of it all, I am no longer the same Ellen who stormed into war. Now, I stand preparing for either reconciliation or farewell. It was late evening when I heard the knock on my apartment door. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a neighbor or delivery mistake. But when I opened it, there he was, Daniel. Not with anger in his eyes. Not with distance in his stance. But with something softer. Something uncertain. And beside him stood Emily. My body stiffened, but Daniel raised a hand gently. Mom, he said calmly. We're not here for a fight. We just want to talk. That night, for the first time in years, we sat at a dinner table together. Not the large table of the house I was once exiled from, but my small wooden one, cramped, scratched, and humble. Conversation was awkward at first, Emily trying politely, me staring into my plate, Daniel balancing between us both. But slowly, words stitched themselves into a fragile fabric again. I don't hate you, Mom, Daniel said after a long silence. I was angry. And scared. But I never stopped loving you. Those words felt like water on fire-scorched earth. My eyes burned, and I didn't hide the tears this time. And I never stopped loving you, I whispered. Even when revenge poisoned me so deeply. I only ever fought because I thought it was protecting you. Then Emily spoke, her voice kind, but firm. If love becomes control, it stops being love. Maybe all of us need to learn how to let love breathe. Wise words, painful as they were. Days turned into weeks. I practiced silence, not the vengeful silence that plotted schemes, but a healing one. I let Daniel live without interference. I let Emily's name pass my lips without suspicion. I stayed in my lane, not as a judge, not as a protector wielding fire, but as a mother who simply was. And slowly, Daniel began returning more often. Not out of guilt, not out of debt, but just because he wanted to. We cooked together. We laughed, awkward at first, then freely. One quiet Sunday, he sat beside me, placed his hand on mine, and said, "You're my mother. That's enough. That's all I ever needed you to be." It was then that I released the last weapon inside me. The hunger. The fire. The crown of ashes I had worn. Now I write this, knowing that the end of my story is not grand, not violent, not shrouded in scandal like Melissa's downfall. My story ends in something far greater, acceptance. I lost years to vengeance. I lost pieces of my soul. But I did not lose everything. Because love, though battered, though scarred, still survived. Daniel still survived. I still survived. And maybe, just maybe, this survival is the truest form of victory. I lived my war. I carried my scars. And I laid them down at last. This is my confession. My truth. My ending. Ellen's narrative reaches its closure here, not with more destruction, but with a hard-earned redemption. She lets go of vengeance and reconciles with her son, finally understanding that survival with love is a greater triumph than victory won in ashes.